My name is Klemen, and I'm going to talk about previews in production, or how to preview your software in production. I'm Klemen, as I said. I really like JavaScript, and the thing I like about JavaScript is that you can kind of stream software from anywhere and just run it on your machine without any downloading, installing, exposing executables and all that. But I'm also really passionate about developer experience, which is something that improves the processes for teams and makes the whole process faster. And then we also get better products as the outcome. So the agenda today, I'm going to first start with Agile and processes. Then we're going to go into workflows and tools. I'm going to continue talking about Webpack and present the model federation part of it. And then there's a demo, and I hope that works. But first, what do I mean by previewing things in production? I prepared this slide. This is the title slide, and this is, you could say it's like a micro frontend, and this slide, or the slide deck, is one of the micro frontends. And basically with model federation, you can actually go back and load another build of the same app without refreshing the page or doing anything special. You just have your build or your bundle stored somewhere, and you can load it anytime, or reload it, change it, and respond to events. So first thing I wanted to touch was Agile, and if you go to the Agile manifesto, they're going to present a few points why they thought Agile was a good thing compared to Waterfall when it started. And the first point was individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change, which is what I think it's really important. And it enables you to be agile if you can just ship something as soon as possible to an end customer, ask them for feedback, and go back to the coding until it's satisfiable, or until we get the result we were after. And while there's most of the value on the left side, or at least that's what they say, there's also some value on the right side. I really didn't like the processes part, so I'm going to talk about that. When I hear processes, you could think of like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg back when Facebook was cool, and they were trying to move fast and break things, and they kind of managed to break many things while going fast. So maybe we should be fast, but not like really break anything like society. But yeah, processes really sound boring. It's the thing that's always stopping us, or slowing us down. And I really wanted to understand why we need them. And so I Googled, like developer, there was not a Stack Overflow post, but there were some articles. And it says that it adds the confidence and consistency. It makes outcomes more predictable, and you can deliver better, or what you actually wanted to deliver. And it also enables us planning, or the management, so they can keep on track with the project or product. But then we also have a creative process, which is like complete opposite of what what the processes should look like, where they're streamlined, things follow one by another, and in creative process you're kind of breaking that. And that's also how I started with this presentation. I really thought talking about micro frontends and Webpack can be quite boring if it's done in, or at least for me it felt like doing that in PowerPoint would kind of ruin the experience of what you can get with Webpack and Model Federation. So I decided to build this app for presentation. And here on the right we have different, let's call them builds. It's bundles served somewhere, and then you get them to a page. And if you want to create one of those windows, I can go to my GitHub, where I have this repo. I can see the slide which is showing, and I think we can find this one, test PR. Yeah, there was a test PR 123 I tested earlier. But I can also edit this and just say, hello Zagreb. I'm gonna open a PR with this, and in a minute, after the build is done, it should show up here with the others. So that's the kind of preview I'm talking about. It's getting an idea, producing the code, and before you can actually see it running in production, you can still serve it or load it in production. And that can be based on a config or based on a special URL, but you can enable people to preview something that's not even merged in production, running production credentials and also APIs that we have in productions. And yeah, that leads us to workflows. And the goal is taking some code that you have on the machine and just shipping it to a customer. It should be as simple as that. But then we introduce the Git, we have to commit, push, there's maybe a CI/CD, and then we get to a customer. And that's only when you're working alone. As soon as you're working with other people, or if you want to be more sure that whatever you ship to production is going to be perfect, you have different stages like CI, environments, and staging, and then production. And when you add more people to that, you also introduce pull requests. With pull requests, you get another feedback loop. When you commit something, open a pull request, ask a coworker or a friend for a code review. They're going to review it and give you some feedback. Then you're going to go back again and do that circle a few more times until you think it's ready to merge. And then you merge it, and then there might be a QA that comes in, and they're like, oh, this is not what we expected, so we have to go back again. And then when you reach that, there's designers, there might be product, and then actual customers. So this is just adding layers and layers of processes on top of the feedback. But as I said earlier, we should still be able to get to the customer, to get the feedback as soon as possible. So this would still be the ideal scenario when using Git. And tooling for the web, it started with PHP. That was quite simple. You could have a few files, HTML, PHP files, CSS, JS, mix that, drop it on a server, and then you can serve that. You can open a subfolder and you serve all that data, you get the server inside. But then things started to get more complicated. And when you started to JavaScript front-end frameworks, the grunt tool popped up quite quick. And that was a tool where you basically defined all the steps for transformations of files that you needed. And the config, when working on a serious project, just started to be like insanely long. And most of the people didn't even open that file or touch it until it was like absolutely necessary to enable some configs. And here you also didn't have too much control over the flow. You couldn't do like multi-track builds where you could take CSS separately or JavaScript and run that in parallel. And then Gulp came. Gulp was similar to Grunt, but you actually used JavaScript, so you defined the task and then you could also execute and pipe those tasks one by one, and that enabled us to actually get something out of it. But the config was still really large and everything was kind of mixed up. And that didn't spark joy for me when I started doing front-end frameworks. And what happened before was that you took all the JavaScript code, concatenated all the files, did some transformations on them, and then get the statics files that you could ship. And that's fine and all, but those files usually didn't have connections between each other, so there was no require or imports. You just had to count that everything is going to be in the same scope. Then came the actual require JS and ES modules, but that was quite late. And by that time, Webpack already started popping up. And Webpack is a model bundler. So every file in your project is treated as a module. You can import it like you can import a CSS file, you can import a PNG, you can import SVGs. It's all just different files, but Webpack kind of treats them as modules. And that's what you defined, how to treat a PNG file, how to treat a JS file, or a TypeScript file. The preview didn't pop up here, but if I refresh the presentation, yeah, here's the Hello Zagreb. So maybe I lost a WebSocket somewhere. But yeah, Webpack, it's a model bundler. You get all the different files, the relations between them, what imports what, and then Webpack does some magic and you get the static assets back. There's JavaScript files, CSS, HTMLs, but you could also have PNGs and other types of files. And you can choose to load them to blobs, for example. So these still remain in JavaScript. You get all the control on how, where, and when things get imported. Okay, and then is anyone using React or Create React app? Yeah. As soon as you want to check how React's Webpack config works, you run the inject and you get really large files again. It doesn't really change anything about how we bundle, but this is also, it's considered as quite a serious config. But on the other hand, the complicated part comes when it's made for everyone. So Create React app was made to support all kinds of different CSS frameworks, all kinds of ways that you can write your JavaScript or TypeScript in. So it just grew through time, and this is only one of the files that you get out of it. And that's not really, doesn't seem any better. But to get a React app running, you basically you create a Webpack file or Webpack config file. You specify which file you want to import. You get a dev server so you can run it locally, like I do here. You can tell it which extensions to resolve, so you don't need to always pass an extension when importing things. And then you define the modules and rules. So for each rule you tell which kinds of file it captures. In this one, it's just JavaScript and TypeScript and also JSX in both. And we're using ES Build Loader because it's way faster than Babel is. You can specify options for the loaders, and then you also have plugin system, which enables you to kind of add more capabilities. One of those is HTML Webpack plugins, which just loads an index HTML and connects it with all the scripts, especially the one that we defined in the entry part. And this all runs and everything, but as soon as you start adding things to it, it's gonna still grow bigger. You're gonna get more rules, or yeah, for more model types, and then maybe you have more plugins that enable the whole process for you. But on the other hand, your code and bundle size will also grow. So when you create bigger projects, you import more dependencies, you have more screens, there's more code you can ship, and that's just gonna grow and expand. And with that, another problem arises, which is build times, and that can be painful to see. Like starting your development environment, waiting for 1 minute, is most of the time it's not okay, especially when you try to debug something that happens in, for example, bundling. You're just wasting your minutes or hours waiting for builds. And then also when you try to publish something, it's also going to take 10, 20, 30 minutes to just build a front end. And people started using micro front end just for that. So maybe you can split out the code in different places. You can use iframes or any other technologies, and that's how you can get like separation of deployment, separation of builds. You don't need to have everything in the same package or in the same GitHub repo. You can just split it out. And one of the ways to do that is with federation. And federation by definition, it's an organization or group within which smaller divisions have some degree of internal autonomy. So what that translates to in development world would be you have multiple teams working on the same kind of bigger projects, but they can still group, and they can be like independent of each other to some degree. Yeah, and that makes them autonomous. So we should enable teams on bigger projects to be able to run or deploy their software without coordinating the whole organization. And there's like different ways in which you can do federations or corporations, and those are just examples of how different tech companies are structured. Like there's no one fits all, and the good thing about module federation and Webpack is that you can decide how to actually distribute that. So yeah, module federation plugin. Module federation plugin is part of Webpack or Webpack's core library. It enables you to kind of create those separated bundles, but then it also gives you a way to connect those in runtime. So in this case, I'm gonna go back to an older title. So this is an old build that I pushed somewhere, and now I can just serve it and then switch back to my my local build. And to get all that power, you define a new instance of module federation plugin. You have to give it a name, a file name that's going to be the output. So if we go to container.js, there's going to be a bundle that can be loaded. We define which files we expose or which modules we want to let people import. And then we can also share some dependencies. Like if you're doing React app, you can put everything in the same tree. And for that, you need to kind of match the versions of React. So in this case, we pass in singleton and eager so that it loads instantly, and then all the other modules are gonna get the same version of React, the same instance of React, and you're gonna be able to switch out things or just load them whenever you need them. And yeah, how do we then load this? We got in this one, in this one we got we created a federated output called container.js, and if we want to load that, we can use 3 simple steps. The first one is just calling Webpack's internal function that initializes sharing, and that's going to make it easier or that's going to enable Webpack to share modules between different builds. And what that means is that you can actually, with shared modules, define what things can be shared. And if you load Tailwind or some JS library, you can also share it with other builds, even though they weren't in the same repo. You can just match them by versions. And then for the second step, you need to load the script. You create a script element, you add a source, the unload one event that's going to resolve a promise, and that's how you know that the script has loaded, and then you actually append that script to the HTML so you can load the script. And then for the third step, now you loaded the script. It created, in this case, remote app instance on window, and you can init that, and by that then you can get the entry. And if you remember, the entry here was what we exposed. So this was an example app. So here, and then you call the factory to get a module out. And then with module you can take a default export, or you can take other exports if it has it. So now I'm gonna demo how to do that. And first, I'm gonna show you the 2 apps. So we have one app, let's call it app 1, running on localhost and 4000. And the other one, which is for 1, which is a different app. And the code for those 2 apps is, we have app.js that just has some divs, and index just loads the apps. So here I already created the function getApp, but for now we're just resolving it as an async import, and then using its default export as the app that we then mount. And that just enables us to have two simple apps running side by side. And now, if I want to add federation to it, I'll go to Webpack config for the app2. Let's start here. I'm gonna add a new plugin. So it's a model federation plugin. We're gonna name it app2. It's gonna be a container JS output with entry in source app.js. So let's see if that matches app.js. Yeah, and we're gonna share React and React DOM. And if I save that and run Webpack again, it's gonna reload, but now we get the container.js file. And if I zoom this in, we're gonna see here's a var app2 that's gonna run on window, and that's gonna create the app2 that we had. And there's a bunch of Webpack code that's gonna get loaded. So this was the first part. The second part, we need to do the same thing for the first app. We're gonna add a new plugin again. Let's call this one app1. It still has a container.js and app.js, everything. So let's load it. Yeah, and here we can also see that we have container.js. And this one is app1, while this one was app2. Okay, so now it's up to those 3 steps that I showed earlier. It's going to be app1 index. And in here we have a getApp function. I'm going to uncomment those 3 lines. They just take the URL search params from window location. You get the name and container out, and now if we have a name and container, we can start with the 3 steps. So first we take the Webpack init sharing. For the second one, we're going to create a new promise that's going to resolve when the container on the app2 is loaded. So let's say there's not going to be any errors, wishful thinking. And then here we're going to resolve. So whenever the script loads, we're going to just resolve this promise. We get the app in scope. And then for the last part, we have to create a module out of it. So first, we take the name. Instead of this one, we can pass it dynamically. We initialize the shared scopes. We get the entry out, we create a module, and then we're gonna return module.default. So if you go back to app1, we can take this one, container, and add the variables. So container equals to this, and name equals to app2. And that loads app2 onto the thing, onto the server, or in the runtime of app1. And we can run them side by side too. Or we could also take the container of the current app, so app1. Say app1 here. Oops. Okay, so container is 4000 container, and name equals app 1. So now it loads it, loads the same app, but it loads it from its own federated server. Maybe, yeah. The thing I try to show here is that you can just build something, put that somewhere on a server, and then in runtime decide what you're gonna load and how. And that's about it for what I had prepared. Yeah, thanks for joining, and if there's any questions.
Any questions, maybe?
That's good.
Yes,
Yeah.
Lisa?
Can you get the mic?
Yeah, you can get closer so you can.
Or I can repeat it.
Yeah, okay. I haven't noticed that you mentioned anything about server-side rendering. So this, is it only client-side?
No, it started, yeah, so the question was about server-side rendering and federation, and it started as client-side only, and then they built SSR for React, but they kept that under a paywall for some time. That was like a year or two, but now it's actually open source, so you can get Next running with federation, and then each team get to like deploy their own thing. You can stitch things in runtime in Node side as well. And you also get a raw kind of Node federation plugin, so you can actually do that on your server. And I think a typical example of that was having the whole infrastructure on 2 Node Lambdas, one for staging and testing and one for production, and then people would just swap which packages they're using, so you can load everything dynamically and kind of extend your whole backend from just 2 Lambdas and a file storage.
Any other questions?
I have no.
Okay, continue.
In short terms, in short sentences, when would you suggest using federation? What is the problem that that federation is giving as a solution?
Yeah, so the question was when to use federation or when it has its most benefits, and the way I've seen it done was when the company had 30 or 50 different front ends. Each team built their own front end for their service, and that meant that every team needed to do authentication and permissions and all that. So instead of, but they still really like that they can have it in their own repo, they can deploy it by themselves. And that's where the federation would be good, because you have 50 apps that can be like really take long to build, and you also can just leverage the whole infrastructure. You can write authentication once and just share it with other modules or teams, and that's how you end up with like.
So we're talking about one look and feel of application, but multiple.
Yeah, it's multiple different apps, but they all come together. You have to have some kind of configurations for that, but it can make life very simple if you have lots of teams working on the same thing. But if you have 1 or 2 teams, maybe it takes more time to develop all the tooling around that and actually using it. Or yeah.
Do you know any company is using federation in production?
I think most of the major tech companies do. I think they have a wall of yeah. So like you can see most of the really big tech are using that, and it's probably solving the problem with too many teams building the same things over and over again, and then not having the touch and feel of the apps consistent. And it's also this repo, it's called Model Federation Examples. This is unofficial documentation for Model Federation, because their docs in the Webpack docs are they're hard to read and understand, and you can easily see all the different cases of how people like stitch different frameworks together just in this, and they're keeping it up to date with latest releases. So if you want to try something, I think this is a good starting point. Okay.
Do you have more questions, Ines?
I can
In this
this
example, we mentioned the JavaScript bundle from the other project.
Yeah.
As a building in the but what about other resources like fonts and images or style?
Basically, if you can do it in multiple different ways. You can use Shadow DOM, and then you're isolating everything. But you can only have the main app or the host app load the CSS for you, load the fonts, and all the assets. You say like that's granted as part of the platform, and then you deal with your business logic and your components, your CSS. But you can have the shared component library can be packed with the host or the main app that loads everything else.
So it needs to be present on the app which is using federation to fetch other bundles.
Yeah, if you want to share it, but you could also just get it with your bundle. Then it's a matter of how you want to preload it, basically. But you can bundle images and everything together. Because here in my presentation, for example, those are all serving images. They have their own CSS for Tailwind. So if I change something, it would only ship the small parts that I need instead of everything. So yeah, but if you have things in modules, you can then decide which modules you want to share or need to share.